Hello. You're listening to One Voice Makes a Difference, a place where people can tell their stories of how God's voice made a difference in their life. We pray you will be inspired and encouraged by today's episode. Now, here's your host, Janet Swanson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to One Voice Makes a Difference podcast. I am so excited that I have a special person with us today. Her name is Nicole, and I'm going to tell you how I found out about her. In 2014, I wrote a book called One Voice, and I thought I would Google myself and see what would come up when I Googled One Voice. And thinking that my name or something like that would come up, Nicole's name came up, and I saw your ministry, Nicole, and I was blown away. So I want to introduce to you Nicole Bromley. Nicole is devoted to spreading a powerful and vital message across America and around the globe, both in her books and in her internationally recognized keynote, Our Little Secret. Nicole uses her own life story to break the silence on sexual abuse and to bring hope and healing, empowering others on a journey from victim to victory over impossible circumstances. I love that. Nicole has authored several books. Hush is one of them, moving from silence to healing after childhood sexual abuse. Then Breathe, finding freedom to thrive in relationships after childhood sexual abuse. And SOAR, a companion workbook to Hush and DVD series for personal and group study. And she has another one in the works. Ooh, that's exciting. I'm excited about this part of your bio because I didn't know this about you, but when I got it off your website, I was very, very impressed by this. Nicole, number one, is the founder of OneVOICE, as well as the founder of Executive Director of OneVOICE4freedom, a nonprofit organization focused on stopping child sex trafficking around the world. In 2010, Nicole began a campaign across East Africa to stamp out child sexual abuse and trafficking, and was the first woman to ever give a public address on the topics of sexual abuse and child sex slavery in the country of Uganda. That was amazing. The First Lady, Janet, not me, a different Janet. I can't pronounce her last name, but
Museveni.
Yeah, there you go. Unveiled Nicole's book, Hush, as a national resource for survivors and citizens in positions of prevention and support. In 2012, Nicole went undercover to Cambodia for a rescue and restoration film project of Life Outreach International, where she met with child sex slaves in brothels and helped them tell their stories. That's incredible. She founded OneVOICE4freedom following that life-changing work and has since built safehouse schools and provided prevention education for hundreds of thousands at-risk children and families in rural and poverty-stricken villages targeted by traffickers around the world. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Janet.
I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed, and not just impressed, but inspired by your story. Now, you also have a podcast, right?
That's right.
Yes.
Yep. The One Voice Podcast.
The One Voice Podcast.
Yes.
So if you Google One Voice, you might find me or Nicole, but
that's right. But my One Voice is one word. So there's no space. So that kind of helps you distinguish. Yeah.
Yes, actually it does. And your story, when I first heard it, just moved my heart because in 2014, I finally wrote my first book about my story, and I had never told anybody. My husband and I had been in ministry. We'd been pastoring. I'd been the pastor's wife. I traveled speaking around, never told anybody my story until after both my parents died. And I thought, now's the time to tell my story because all these triggers started coming up.
Yeah.
And people were shocked. So when I found out your story in the middle of telling my own story, I was like, okay, God, I know I did the right thing and I was on the right track. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, I just want to ask you, can you tell all of our listeners your story from childhood? Tell us what happened to you.
Well, yes, in a nutshell. I grew up, I think everyone considered me like the perfect girl from the perfect family. I grew up in a small Midwest town and, I was popular. I was a star athlete. I was the homecoming queen. I was involved in youth group. I was doing all of the things on the outside that no one would have ever suspected. I was carrying a really dark secret. I was full of shame. I was planning how to run away from my perfect home. And that was because I was being sexually abused my whole childhood by my stepfather, a man who everyone trusted in my community. No one would have ever suspected it, And so I went through many, many years of sexual abuse, feeling like, this was something that was normal because I believed everything he said. It's normal. All girls go through this. No one talks about it. I would lose my family. No one would believe me if I talked about it. There's so many reasons why I felt so much shame and I was silenced, Janet. You know how that is it's such a silencing evil that is, affecting so many people around the world. But for me, I thought, well, if I can just get through to 18 years old, I'll be able to put this behind me. But it got to a point when I was 14 years old where I started to really think this isn't okay. And I need this to stop. And, I talk about all the details in my book, Hush, but to kind of give you a quick glimpse, I finally found the courage to tell my mom. It was the summer before my freshman year of college. And my mom, unlike most of the survivors that I work with, my mom believed me. And I feel very blessed and grateful for that because I know most survivors don't have a mom or a safe person that believed them and stood by them, but I did. And so we left the home. My mom and I left. My mom reported the abuse. And exactly a week later, my stepfather committed suicide.
Wow.
And, that was a really hard, confusing time for me. I felt, I finally found my voice and then I didn't see justice. I felt like, now what? I felt like everything was shattered. And so that day that I found out that he took his life, I vowed I was never going to tell anyone again. I was just going to try to be the perfect girl that everyone wanted me to be. And slapped a smile on my face and kept overachieving. But it didn't fix the pain inside. It was never a Band-Aid that allowed healing to occur. It was just this outward thing. And so, eventually I had to realize that finding my voice, that telling my story, that beginning the healing journey was, what I needed to do. And I needed to find safe places to do that. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it all started.
So how did it make you feel though, after you found your voice and then your stepfather committed suicide? Because that's very traumatic,
Absolutely. Well, I didn't even tell my best friend for an entire year after that. I mean, I kept my vow. I truly did. And the next summer I was 15 and I was invited to a church camp. My mom and I had just started going to this new church. And so I went to this church camp. And again, I hadn't even told my best friend. No one in my church knew my story, But the last day of camp, they had this time where anyone could get up and share something, cool that God did that week, or, some were sharing their testimonies. And for some reason, I don't even remember it, but it was like the Holy Spirit grabbed my legs and I just walked up to that microphone, and in front of probably like 300 teenagers, I told my story for the first time. Yeah.
Wow.
And, it was like crickets when I walked off the stage. I felt so embarrassed. I thought, oh my God, no one's going to date me. Like all these things, because no one knew what to do with that.
Right.
But the story makes its turn here for me, and really is where I believe that God really put his hand on me for ministry and to use my story and my pain for good and for purpose. Because I went back home and I had been journaling. I had heard someone say one time that, like, if you're mad at like your parents, if your parents are good parents, they want you to come to them with your anger, your questions, your confusion, your pain, rather than just having all of that going on inside of you and running from them.
Right.
And so that's when, that summer before I went to that church camp, I started journaling, and I was like really talking to God about all of this stuff. And I was mad, and I was really allowing myself to feel and to say the real things, like even all the cuss words that I knew, I wasn't holding back. I wasn't faking it.
Right.
And so I came home from that camp after having told my story, and I began journaling again to him, like, okay, I felt compelled to do this thing. And now what? Now, like, no one in my church, like, I don't want them knowing this. Why did I do that? I felt like, why did I kind of trust you with that? Well, a few days later, I started getting letters in my mailbox. Now, Janet, you probably remember back in the day when we had pen pals.
Yes.
Right. Yes. That's like old, archaic by now. But like back in the day when I was 15 years old, we wrote letters. And I got home from that camp and I started receiving letters from other teens at that camp that were saying, Nicole, thank you so much for your courage. Me too. I'd never told anyone, but you helped me realize, like, I need to tell too. I wanted to tell you. And so it was like this light bulb came on, this moment of, God had given me the courage to step forward, to step out of my hiding place and to use my voice. And then that's what enabled other people to say me too. It helped them to begin to tell their story. And so I started writing back and forth with these other survivors from this church camp, helping them to tell their parents, or tell a friend, or just begin that journey too. And it was just such an amazing turning point, truly, in my life. And I can remember sitting on my bedroom floor with all these letters. I remember sitting just crisscross applesauce on my floor with these letters all around me, my Bible in front of me, my journal over here with like all my hate mail to God. And I opened my Bible and I did this thing that my pastor always tells me tells our congregation not to do, is like, don't just open your Bible and find a verse. Like, God doesn't just like do that, but I did that anyways. And I always tell him, like, it worked for me, because that day, sitting on my bedroom floor, I opened to 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, that talks about God, comforts us as we comfort others, and it empowers us that what he is providing for us as we are healing, as we're wrestling out, as we're grieving, as we're hurting, like what he gives to us, we are then able to give to others in their troubles as well. And I was like, that's exactly what's happening right now with these letters before me. And I don't think I've ever looked back. I've always felt like that was really, really awful what I went through. A lot of shame, Janet, and a lot of pain and questions and anger and all the things. But in the midst of it all, God says, that was really ugly and evil, but if you give it to me, together we can do something really cool
and make a difference.
That's right. That's right.
A lot of people go to their grave with that secret.
Mm-hmm.
They don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And I remember shortly after I wrote my book, there was a lady in her late 70s. Mm-hmm. She gave me a call and she said, I read your book and I want to order like 15 or 20 of them because I want to give them out. And I said, okay, that's great. And she was like, well, I just wanted to let you know that I've never told anybody what I'm about to tell you. But when I was a teenager, my babysitter, she would come over and she would sexually abuse me. And from like 9 to 12, 13 years old. And she was really confused because it was another woman doing it to her.
Right. Yeah.
And she was angry and they were from a small town. They all went to church together. So what do? She said, I couldn't say anything because it would bring too much shame to our community, to that person, to the church. So she carried this secret around her whole life. And she said, secretly, I've been angry my whole life until I read your book. And then I was ready to release it and tell somebody.
Wow.
And that's what happens when we share our
Yes,
testimony. It
that's right.
helps other people, but it sets us free all at
Mhm.
the same time of the
Mhm.
shame, because
Yes.
there is so much shame involved in it and
Mhm.
thinking it's your fault. Now,
Yeah.
this happened to me as I'm growing up and even becoming a Christian. I
Mhm.
kept thinking, oh, well, everything, if something went wrong, it must be my fault.
Right. Mm.
Did you ever think anything like that? Did you have
Absolutely. Mhm.
issues like some of us had, like God had to really help me deal with that.
Mhm.
Like, because sometimes when you're a child, you're thinking, what did I do to make this happen?
That's right. Yeah.
And you grow up. So how did you deal with that?
Mhm. Well, one thing that I've always found insightful was understanding what an abuser does, understand the grooming process. Many times, especially for children, and even for adults, who there's an abuse of power or something like that, they they cause the victim to feel like we are doing this. And if we are doing this, then that means I'm at fault too. Like
Mm,
I've somehow chosen to be here.
mm,
A lot of times there are situations where I liked the attention.
mm,
I wanted his affection because he was my father figure, right? So
mm,
there's something that they use, a vulnerability, to make you feel like you somehow put yourself in the situation. You liked certain parts of it. And that's what then you carry into your healing in your adulthood, or you're not your healing, where you're really struggling, feeling the shame of it.
wow.
Um,
Mm,
yeah, I think that there's a lot of hidden shame. So many times we don't talk about the abuse because we're afraid of what people would think about us, because
mhm.
there's a stigma that surrounds sexual abuse even now,
Yeah.
especially in small towns. Or, for your friend and the woman that your story really impacted, the stigma of same-sex sexual abuse,
Mm,
right? There's
wow.
all these different levels. Or, I worked with a lot of adults who've been abused by pastors or counselors, and it's like, but like I was nobody, and he was this amazing person. So of course everyone's going to think like I chose this, that I was giving consent, but I wasn't, so the
Yeah.
shame just occurs in so many ways. And then you're right, you carry that later into all parts of your life, relationships, where you think if anything goes wrong with this, it has to be my fault.
That's right.
And it's rooted in that abuse. It's
Wow.
very
And
common.
so how do you get rid of that?
Well, I think it's a long journey. I think realizing that it's not your fault is a huge, huge step. For me, Janet, personally, I'll tell you, like I I was speaking about this stuff, as an adult in college. I was an advocate, and um, I really believed that your abuse wouldn't have been your fault, and anybody who came to me wouldn't be my fault, because
Mhm,
abuse is abuse.
mhm,
But I held on to certain parts of mine that I thought,
mm,
well, and to be really frank, it was a real moment of realizing for me, knowing that my body responded to specific experiences of sexual abuse by my stepdad
mhm.
was what held the shame. It was like this box locked up in the corner. It was like, sure, like all these other experiences where I was sexually abused as a child, that wasn't my fault. He was my stepdad. I was a kid, like, I didn't know better, or all these things. Um, that wasn't my fault. But like, if I tell this specific one,
Mhm.
then that's when everybody's going like, oh, well, Nicole, actually that time, yeah, you probably asked for it, or it probably was a little bit your fault too, so I had that narrative in my mind that would just kind of bite at me. So my
Mhm.
shame was in that. And it wasn't until I finally told that one, like a specific memory,
Yeah.
and I received the feedback, the truth that dispelled the lie, That's when the freedom started to come. And then that's when I started to receive more knowledge and wisdom from the Lord, from safe people that, like, Nicole, it doesn't matter if your body responded. Your body did what it was supposed to do, what God made it to do.
Exactly.
It wasn't supposed to be awakened in that way by that person at that age, whatever it was. So knowing that those were all truths could dispel the lie. And that's where my shame broke. I think it comes through talking about it in safe places with safe people that can give you not only an ability to just talk, but also to, when there's certain lies that come up, to be able to hear the truth spoken back. I think there's a lot of power in that.
That is so true, because it's basically you're believing a lie because that's all you know.
That's right.
And that's what the voice you hear in your head. This is your fault. This happened. So you're guilty. So you grow up in life believing this lie because you were trained to. But when you find out the truth, you trade that in. You trade the lie in for truth, and you make that exchange. And that's just one thing that I constantly do with the Lord, is anytime that my heart leans in toward a lie about myself or about my circumstances or about faith, I'll just say, okay, well, that's not truth. I'm going to trade that in. What does God say about this, and what really happened? And it makes a huge difference. You guys, everybody that's listening out there, I don't know who this is for today, but maybe you've been carrying around guilt and shame your whole life. And today the Lord is calling you to trade that lie in for the truth that this is not your fault. The things that happened to you, it's not your fault. And I'll never forget, Nicole, the first time when I was taken away from my home, my mom and my stepfather, I kept thinking, gosh, I'm the bad person. I told someone and then they come and they took me away. I thought they were going to take the bad guy away, but I must be the bad person now. So by the time I got to the counselor and they were about to put me in foster care, she looked at me, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, because I was holding my head down. I walked in with my head low. I could not look at anybody in the eyes. She put her hand underneath my chin and she said, listen, don't you ever hold your head down again. This is not your fault. You always hold your head up. And I'll never forget that, because it really impacted my life, because I thought it was my fault and I couldn't hold my head up. And from that day forward, though, it really touched my life. Her voice in that moment made a difference in my life to keep going and hold my head up. But yet I kept a secret. It wasn't until years later. So I want to talk a little bit, Nicole, about triggers. Did you have any triggers when you started dating or when you got married?
Absolutely. I mean, I probably had the trigger yesterday.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, when you go through trauma and you're still doing life, like, that trauma is embedded in you to where anything sensory about that memory can be just remembered, and your body remembers. One of my favorite books is called The Body Keeps the Score, because your body sometimes remembers things that you think you've forgotten or buried or denied. And so, I could be driving down a street and I can see a barn that resembles the place where I was abused, and it can make me start sweating, right? Or I met a girl who, her husband changed his deodorant, and the new scent, she could not be intimate with him, couldn't come near him, was scared of him, didn't know why. And it took going to her counselor and started talking through and processing like all the things until they finally came to realize that was the same brand that her abuser used. And so the scent of him,
Triggered,
the body remembers. Yeah, you can be triggered. But, I think having come to the place I am now in my healing, I've moved from being afraid of the triggers to almost wanting the triggers to speak. I want to learn. I want to learn from them, and just being able to give that a little bit of space in my life to where I know I am not in that situation anymore. I am strong. I am confident, and I have walked through some really hard places in my healing journey, some really dark paths, and I've gotten through them to the light, you know? And so I have confidence when I look back and I see where I've come, what the Lord has done in my life, the great people he's brought along, how much stronger I feel, that I know that when I have a new trigger, I can face this one too. And maybe this one's got some information that maybe, the Lord knows I'm ready for.
That's right.
And I can trust him with this. But I have to, when they come, I have to make sure, if I'm willing to listen to them, that I'm also caring for myself in the midst of it. I need to slow down. For me personally, I need to look at what my self-care options are right now, because I also think there's times in my life where I'm really busy and I'm like, now is not the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's okay to say like, oh, I do not want to look at that right now. Like, what am I feeling and why? I'm going to just write this down. I'm going to come back to it when I feel like I'm ready to. But I think the point is to know that they will come. I think expecting that helps. And then also, look at your history. Look how far you've come. And you can do this one too. It's just here. It's just here to have a conversation. And that might sound weird for some people, but we can learn new things about ourselves based on how we feel in certain situations with certain people,
I think it's too the difference between responding to the triggers and reacting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, if they react to that trigger, they'll go find like some alcohol or, do something.
How can I numb this?
Yeah. Let me just numb.
Yeah.
Or find another person, get my, my value from the things that I do instead of who I am, And I think that I so agree with you. I think the triggers help us because God reveals what he wants to heal. And he peels it back layer by layer. And what I say, trigger by trigger. And if we do listen to him, God will show us, this is what I want to heal in you. I want to heal abandonment issues, or I want to heal you of guilt and shame and whatever else the trigger may bring to you. Nicole, a couple of years ago when the pandemic started, we're pastors here at Crossroads Community Church, and we had a suicide in our church. It was devastating. And she was my friend. We have been friends since I was 17, 18 years old. And some information had come about that. And nobody knows really why. She just got sick a year and a half before she committed suicide. And she loved the Lord. She received counseling and went through all kinds of counseling, and nothing worked. And when the pandemic happened, we were all devastated by it. I know firsthand what suicide does to people around you and what it feels like and what it does to the spouse or the children of the home. What about your mom and your family? How did you deal with this suicide, knowing now the circumstances that the truth was revealed?
Man, I think with really any loss, there's so many stages of grief. And even though my immediate was anger, because I felt like justice was robbed. And then later I felt relief because I knew I'd never be sexually abused by him again. Then later I felt extreme sadness because, the loss of him actually meant the loss of his whole side of the family too. I felt rejected and abandoned. And then,
Mm.
there's just a lot of, the sadness of what could have been had he not chosen that.
Mm-hmm.
Not even just not chosen the suicide, but not chosen to abuse me,
Yeah.
because he wasn't all bad.
Mm-hmm.
There was a side to him that was a really good dad.
Right.
So, which was what made it confusing for me, and also what I think made me confused as to not tell. But yeah, I just think for so many people, grief is such a big term that we don't understand how to walk it out.
Mm.
But everyone, just like everyone's healing journey looks different for them, I think the grief journey looks different for everyone too. So for my mother, it looked different than what it would look like for me.
Right.
Right. And so just, I think, allowing the feelings to come
Mm-hmm.
and not judging them when they did,
Mm-hmm.
or saying I should be at this place, or I should feel what my mom's feeling right now. Like it's all our own personal journey, and to, I think, walk hand in hand with the Lord and trust what he's doing and not compare that to someone else's was helpful for me.
Yes, that's awesome. And you're right. Grief is like the ocean. Sometimes it's calm, and sometimes, you experience those undertows and the waves crashing down on you, and it's really tough, but God is faithful, right? I mean, he's there with us, and the word says that he's close to the brokenhearted. And he is so close to those who have been abused and those who don't have justice yet. But the beautiful thing, I want to ask you this question too, is because at somewhere in our walk, we have to forgive those people who did us wrong.
Yeah.
In your journey, what did that look like for you?
Yeah. And I appreciate that you said in my journey, because I think it's a very different for lots of people. And particularly the word forgiveness can really be a difficult word, because especially in the church, it's used to weaponize victims. If you're not to this place yet, if you haven't done this, then, you're not right with the Lord. But it's caused a lot of pain and pushed a lot of believers away from community. Because I think, again, it's used to weaponize. And so for me, forgiveness has looked a lot like cutting the cord. And I held on to a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, and I didn't know where to place the blame, because I was still holding so much within me. So it wasn't until I got through the step we already talked about of realizing it's not your fault. I couldn't forgive someone that I didn't even know if it was their fault. So that part of the healing journey, the forgiveness and the cutting the cord from my abuser and from the anger and the pain, all the things that he held, it came later in the journey. I needed to be mad first. I needed to understand it wasn't my fault. I needed to replace lies with truth. And then later in my journey was when I realized that I wanted to not let my stepdad off the hook, right? I wanted to let myself off the hook. I felt like whatever I was doing, whatever relationship I was in, whatever the next thing for me was, I felt connected to my stepfather. He wasn't even around, but I felt this cord that was always pulling me back to where I'd already been. Like, I wanted to move forward in my life. I wanted to be free, but there was something that felt like a rope connecting me back. I was dragging him around and dragging all the things that the abuse held, the yucky things around. And so forgiveness for me was the cutting of the cord, like the scissors that cut the cord and allowed me to be free, allowed me to unleash myself from all of that bitterness, the anger, some of the triggers, even to be able to move forward in my life. And
Mm.
that, the Bible talks about that forgiveness isn't something that we do one time, but like 70 times 7. So
Mhm.
it's something that I can come back to too. Like I might feel like, okay, I wrote a letter to him, right?
Mm.
And I let it all out. I placed the blame where it belonged, but I said, but I'm choosing to move on from here.
Mhm.
And so it's not over with then, like, a couple
Mhm.
years later, it comes back up and I got to revisit.
Mhm.
It's more of a letting go. I like that terminology better.
Mhm.
Especially for those who maybe have been hurt in the church. So yeah, but I think it's a really big step. I don't ever tell any survivor it's a requirement, because I just trust the Lord in their process to reveal it when it's time. And he
Yeah.
does that. He does that.
Yeah, because, unforgiveness, or it's so heavy when you hold it inside your heart. It's so heavy because you want unforgiveness in a way. And even for me in my journey, it was like, you didn't spend one day in jail. Nothing happened to you. I'm the one that was taken away. And so what's going to happen to you? And it could it made my life miserable for a little while.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I really 100% gave my heart to the Lord, because we weren't church going people when all this happened. And so yeah, it was something not until I came into the church, that I realized that, hey, I'm forgiven and I need to forgive too. But how do you do that? I've heard so many people say, well, how do you do that? Because I'm not letting him off the hook.
Right.
And that's not what
And
it
that's
means.
what I say. It's not that, like, we've gotten it all wrong when that's what we think forgiveness is. Okaying injustice, evil, crime. No, we're not forgiving that. We're freeing ourselves from what has kept us bound to our past or to our abusers. That's what forgiveness does. It acknowledges the damage done, all of it. It says that was wrong. It says that was sin. It was evil. It was damaging. But it's saying, I am not going to stay connected to that because I have so much ahead of me. So I'm going to set this down here and let God deal with it.
Along your journey of healing, and I've heard you say this many times before in your podcast, that it's a lifetime of healing. And I 100% agree with that, because I don't think we're ever 100% healed of anything until we get to heaven, because we live in a broken world, right? It's just a broken world. And if I get healed from
some
one
people
thing,
get mad at me about that though.
Oh, really?
They want to be like, I need to know there's a goal. Well, I need to see it and I need the checklist, So some people it's hard, but for me, it's been freeing because it's a journey and it's an adventure. And, there's no expectation to be at a certain place at a certain time. Like, I can show up as I am today, and that's good. That's good.
It's beautiful to take one day at a time and say, Lord, this is what hurts today.
Yes.
And this is how I feel today. I feel abandoned. I feel shameful. I feel lonely. And let him take that from me for today, because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own, right? We need to deal with today, what today brings in, and the wave that's crashing down on us. Because not only did you lose that person, you lost your childhood. You lost a bit of yourself in that. And now you got to embrace this new you that's healthy and that is working toward every day of staying healthy.
Yeah.
What's healthy in relationships, what's healthy in church, what's healthy with my my family now, because so many people are bitter and angry and hang on to that. They haven't cut it off yet, that everything becomes unhealthy in relationships, and they begin to repeat a cycle where what you said, Nicole, you just cut it off. You're just like, that's what it looked like for me, is I just had to cut that and say, listen, I'm not going to carry that weight. It's not worth it. It's not worth it,
Yeah. I think unforgiveness puts the focus too on the one who hurt us.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's able to just put the bags down and take a deep breath and take that big step forward and leave it there. Yeah. And it comes
Exactly.
back up. And that's why it's a healing journey, like sometimes we pick them back up at different times. And then we're reminded, oh, this is really heavy,
That's right. I don't want it.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean God isn't like so powerful. It just
Yeah.
means he wants to walk with us through all of this. There's always
Mhm.
more to learn. There's more to heal. And that's what I love. It's like, there's no finish line for healing, like, because there's always more available, and it's choosing just to take another step with him.
Nicole, when did you realize for the first time that, hey, I'm going to use my story to help other people? And when did you realize that, hey, this is something that maybe I can do to encourage other people in my own journey and help them along the way?
Mm. Well, I think that church camp experience gave me a little taste of it. It was like the first time I ever thought about that. But even still, I was still a teenager and not really ready to step into all of that at that time. So then I went to college and I thought, well, I'm going to study psychology, and maybe one day, like, I could be, have a private practice and help people in my little office. That would be so cute, with lots of books, and, it would just be a precious little space where I could help people in that way. And then it was my senior year of college, and I was just volunteering anywhere I could to be where there were hurting women and children. And I was shadowing an advocate from a local rape crisis center into the local high schools, where she would talk about the issues of sexual abuse or sexual harassment or rape, or all of those things, and gave a great PowerPoint of definitions. But no one really talked. None of the students really opened up. And so I said to her after one of the presentations, I think if we could share like a real life story, maybe these kids would like maybe talk more, share their own stories. Because I had remembered back to when I did that at that camp, and that's how it worked. And she said, okay, Nicole, well, if you can find a survivor brave enough to tell their story, you let me know. And I was like, okay. So that was like my open door. And yeah, when I then began to share, in addition to what she was sharing, I mean, the kids were coming out of the woodwork telling their stories, and it was
Crazy,
an
isn't it?
amazing. Yeah. And it just really, I think, showed me that God will plant a seed and let it grow. And he's not pushy, allows it to kind of take root. And then you get in the right situations, you step into the right places, because he's illuminating these little steps for you. You walk through it even when you're scared. And eventually, you get vision for something really good in the world, and you can help people if you want to. And it's been a really fun part of the journey.
Yeah.
But that's where it started.
I'm a studier of the word of the Bible. I love the word of God, and it's really strengthened me in my journey.
Yeah.
And in the book of Ephesians, it talks about how God redeems the time. And the whole book of Ephesians is on relationships and how he redeems the time. And, that word redeems the time, it literally means to buy back what was lost, right? But if you go a little deeper in it and you study it a little deeper, it means I'm creating God moments that buys back what I've lost. I want to ask you, have you had some God moments that redeemed what you lost?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I've been sharing my story for 20 years now. And honestly, every time I share my secret, I find myself in a room full of secrets, and everyone's story looks different. But I think just helping people turn the light on where they've had darkness for maybe their whole life has been a God moment for me, where, he can use anyone's story. Something that I thought I would take to my grave was so ugly and disgusting in my life that he turned the light on it, and it wasn't as nasty anymore. Like, there was new growth. There was good things that came and that could be used to help other people turn the light on. So yeah, it's been, I mean, I could tell you story after story after story of
Mhm.
that. But in general, I think that's one of the most amazing. Um, yeah. I mean, so many times it's like the woman who shared with you after reading your book.
Mhm.
I just think, especially my first book was written like 14 years ago.
Mhm.
And there's so much I've evolved since then. Like sometimes I read it and I'm like, that's not my voice as much anymore. But
Mhm.
like God still uses it. You know
Right.
what I mean? Because it's
Yeah.
his story.
Yeah.
And that's what's so cool is just to then get an email of someone like randomly picked up my book in like a thrift store,
Mm.
and they're just weeping and they're like, I finally was able to tell my husband, and it's been an amazing experience. It's like so crazy.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
those God moments. And it does, it kind of just, it redeems. That's what Jesus wants to do in our life. He wants
Right.
to redeem everything that was stolen, broken, lost,
Mm,
destroyed. And he's always building and rebuilding, building
mm,
and rebuilding, tearing down lies and building the truth. And that's
mm.
our journey of healing. And that's what healing looks like. You know, a
I
lot of
love
people
that.
think, yeah,
And I think of like we both have 3 boys,
yeah,
and that rebuilding can happen for the next generation.
yeah,
I know that your healing journey has informed the way you parent. You probably have harder conversations with your kids than your parents had with you,
oh, yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And you talk about real things. And like that is what I love so much is the story of redemption can then be passed down in the way that I mother, the way that I talk to my kids' friends, the
Mm.
way that I call out red flags that I see in relationships around me. Like the redemption is not just for me in my life, but it's for the next ones too.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. And you're so right. We are, a lot of people they don't tell their children what they've been through. But when
Right.
I first came out, my kids heard my story for the first time, all three of my boys.
Mm,
It changed their perspective on women completely. Like they're like, wow, to honor and respect. They didn't know that those kind of things happened a lot.
right. Right.
But statistics say 1 out of every 4 girls is
Mhm.
abused before the age of 12 years old, sexually
Mm,
abused. And 1 out of 6 boys
yep.
is abused before the age of 12 years old. And to find the courage to tell your story, I feel like at any age is a God moment because in those moments that you're
Right.
telling your story, God's helping you and
Mhm.
He's redeeming the time and He can make something beautiful out of your life.
Mhm.
Isaiah 61 is beautiful when He says, I'll turn your mourning into dancing, I'll give you beauty for
Mhm.
ashes. And maybe someone's listening right now, Nicole, that their life is full of ashes and mourning.
Mhm.
And I want to ask you, Nicole, if you would, will you just pray for that
Mhm.
1 girl out of 4 or that 1 boy out of 6 that has, they've reacted to the
Yeah.
ashes of their life and they need prayer right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
God, we thank you for the lives that are impacted by this conversation. And specifically, really just ask you, Lord, to be with those who relate, be with those who understand, and just be a safe place to them, to sit with them in the grief and the confusion and the anger and the sadness and the feeling silenced. And just pray for boldness
Mm.
to step out of that dark place and look for the light, look for a place that feels comforting, people who are better listeners than talkers.
Mm.
people who would believe. And I pray too for those listening that would be the recipient of a story, that you would empower them to be a safe place, to listen, to love, to support, to be that non-judgmental oasis where a survivor could come and feel like they could tell it all, where the shame could come off, where the chains could be broken. And God, we just ask, Father, that you would use this conversation to bring freedom, to bring hope, and to truly set someone on that path of healing that maybe looked so far away for so long, but possibly after today just feels like maybe it's okay to step out, to step out of hiding and to do it afraid. And God, we just thank you. We just give you our stories, and we thank you that you're the author of the next step, and we just give you the next step and just trust that you'll be there because you always have been. We love you, Lord.
Yes. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. I really can feel the sweetness of his presence right now. And you guys, all that are listening out there, I want you to know that God is with you and God is the author of your life. And he does have another chapter written. And I believe God has good things for you. So I want you to have hope and lean into the goodness of God, and that you have, as Jeremiah 29:11 says, God gives you a future and a hope. And he says, then you will come to me and you will pray to me and I will answer you quickly. He says, then you will seek me and you will find me. You will search for me with all of your heart and you will find me. And the beautiful thing behind that is this, that before we can seek God and find who he is, you have to know and respond to how he thinks about you. That whole scripture in Jeremiah 29 is a response of, God, since you love me so much, and since you want to give me a future and a hope, I can now come to you and pray to you and seek you with all of my heart because you're a safe place. That's so good. Thank you, Lord. All right, you guys. Thank you, Nicole, so much for being on this podcast. Thank you for listening to One Voice Makes a Difference podcast. And I'm going to put in the show notes all of Nicole's information, her website. If you would like to contact her, maybe for a speaking engagement or just read her book, I'll put all of those things in the show notes so you can get a hold of her. And again, thank you, Nicole, for making a difference. Thank you for your beautiful spirit and for coming on this podcast. I feel so honored to have.
I do too. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been such a sweet conversation and I appreciate your journey so much.
Thank you. And to all my listeners, thank you for tuning in to One Voice Makes a Difference. Again, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to One Voice Makes a Difference. It is our prayer that through this episode, God has given you a new hope and inspiration to come out of darkness, break the silence, and tell somebody so his light and healing power may begin working in you. If you would like to connect with Janet, visit her website at janetswanson.org. Finally, if you are currently in crisis, please call the 24/7 crisis hotline at 1-800-273-8255 or visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Don't hesitate. Your voice and your life matters.